Let's start by just opening it up. Questions that you have about the section first. Okay, maybe we use the quiz as our way to start the discussion. How'd you answer the question?
I think that he used Gatsby to symbolize like the American dream.
Okay. And so, how does this work? Like, especially on this end, what is his dream?
Gatsby's dream is to get Daisy.
So, how did you talk about it?
I put that once Gatsby died, the American dream died as well. And that Nick sort of like talks about this when he's on Gatsby's beach
Mm-hmm.
and he's describing how the green lands is related to like America's green lands and or the light of the green and how the explorers are finding having to find a place without the houses and stuff.
Mm-hmm. So, good call here to see the green connection. What kinds of explorers is he thinking about here? Did you catch it? You can use your book too. You don't have to have all this in your head, really. Pull your book out. Use it as a reference. So this is the very last page of the book. So he talks about as he looks out at the beach and he thinks back to the certain sailor that would have seen that land green and no houses. Catch what kind of sailor? Dutch. Anybody know enough about their history to be able to explain why that's so important? So if you go back to, of course, we're in New York. New York was founded as a Dutch settlement, New Amsterdam, before it switches over to being New York. And so here, with imagining this land unblemished by all of it and see what it looked like to that Dutch sailor, he's going back to the origin of the American dream, to the first person that saw this land. What must it have been like? And he brings in that idea of the possibilities that are there and all of it. And so what he's balancing here is sort of beginning the promise of the American dream to what we're seeing now. Think about this similarly to how we talked about the Thomas Paine essay that we just finished. Paine is looking at America at its formative. By definition, what are the possibilities here in America? And of course, in the essay that you produced, many of you probably challenged the actualities of it. Sure, in principle, it could be like this, but in practice, here's what we're finding. Fitzgerald's doing kind of the same thing here. What was this like to the guy who first saw it versus, hey, what's it like now to this definite and tangible guy that I watched try to get it and fail? So how does that relate to the generation? Because everything you're telling me so far, good, insightful stuff that you're seeing, but how did you make the turn then to say this is how we're representing the lost generation, their concepts, their ideals?
The last generation is like the present American dream
Mm-hmm.
in their time. They already have all the wealth and social class that the explorers would like idealize and stuff. So they have all the um, they're the American dream already, even if like they don't realize it because they're used to it.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really good point that we can bring in to talk about how to this generation, materialism and wealth was a big part of this. But you notice that Gatsby's dream doesn't necessarily, materialism and wealth are how he thinks he can get it. But there's a little more of a nuance to where he goes with this to make the connection. I'm not saying that you're wrong because you're not. A lot of what you're saying is perfect and right on task, but we got to look at that last page of what Fitzgerald does with it. So he comes up, he talks about that Dutch sailor, and if you kind of go down that paragraph, he says, that it had once pandered in whispers to the last and greatest of all human dreams, which is where he's going here to the American dream. And he says, for a transitory enchanted moment, man must have held his breath in the presence of this continent, compelled into an aesthetic contemplation he neither understood nor desired, face to face for the last time in history with something commensurate to his capacity for wonder. So think about the fact that when this Dutch sailor comes, like, most of the rest of the world is already conquered, put down. It's the American continent that has always held this magic of what there is and what it can be. But think about that word of wonder. How does that connect to Gatsby as a figure? And think back to like all the other parts of the book. Maybe think back to chapter 6 and that conversation we had about the rock of the world being founded on a fairy's wings. So what was Gatsby able to do? He what? He achieved success by reinventing himself. Remember, that whole part about the fairy's wings thing is Gatsby's ideal that, I can dream things, but I can make them reality. And he does. He takes himself to being this successful thing. He understands that what he needs to get here is wealth and materialism. He gains it. What is it that he wants here? Yes, he wants Daisy, but let me pose a question to you. Does he want Daisy Buchanan? Or does he want Daisy Faye? Remember, we've said that what Gatsby wants is to go back to Louisville and get married where they were, where their relationship started. He wants nothing more of this girl than to say that she never loved Tom. He wants the past. So if you look at where the paragraph goes here then, as he thinks about Gatsby, he says, and as I sat there brooding on the old unknown world, which is this Dutch sailor, I thought of Gatsby's wonder when he first picked out the green light at the end of Daisy's dock. This is that green connection. Let's connect the land and the light. He had come a long way to this blue lawn, and his dream must have seemed so close that he could hardly fail to grasp it. Well, you go back to that image from the first chapter. When we first see Gatsby, he's standing on the lawn, he's reaching out to the light. All those years he's wanted to get closer and closer to it, and this is the first chance he's, oh, I'm so close. He didn't know that it was already behind him, somewhere back in that vast obscurity beyond the city, where the dark fields of the Republic rolled on under the night. Okay, so there's two ways that we can see this. It's behind him because what he wants is in the past. It's also behind him because what he wants is in the West. It's in Louisville. It's not in New York. And so it's kind of that concept of the American dream. It's always the opportunity that's presented. And think about how opportunity, as time went on, it moved where for Americans? This is where you have to bring in your history a little bit. West. Think about Manifest Destiny. Sea to shining sea. So we end this thing with Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgastic future that year by year recedes before us as though this light continues to move further away. It eluded us then. He didn't get it. But it gives this sense of continuing on. Even though we didn't get it, we're going to still pursue it. He says, like a boat against the current. Think generationally for a moment here about what we have. Here, we have this sense that in the past, the opportunity was present. Man, we could have done anything. But here, does the American dream seemingly exist for this lost generation? So we can bring in some of the concepts we talked about at the beginning of the book. That this lost generation is filled with this ideal of cynicism. They're cynical because of what they've seen in war and what they've seen in the world. That optimistic concept doesn't exist. And they've seen lots of people die. And they don't quite know how to go forward and what it is they want. And so to them, they see the American dream as this old ideal. Gatsby's chasing a dream from his past. He's not chasing something that's actually attainable, something that's in the present. It would be like if your dream was to be the first man on the moon. Well, it's impossible. Like, it's already happened. And you're like, oh no, I can do it. I'm gonna totally do it. It's like, no, it's already been done. You can't get it. We have this idea that's there and what we have with it. Are you starting to see are some of these pieces clicking for you? Because I think what the big thing is you have it. It's there in your head. I think the big thing that's missing is the commentary to link those ideas together, to really see it as that whole. And it's a part that, with our argument parts, sometimes we struggle with. And, I think some people struggled with that on the pain piece because they know what they want to talk about with America. And they have these really big ideas that they notice, like, oh, I see it. But when they put it down, they felt like they had these big globs of topics and they didn't quite know how to make it work together and move forward. That's where that commentary piece comes in. This process of just talking it out and doing, it's not about being like, you tell me what you think so I can tell you how you're wrong. It's instead to go, I want you to force those words out. I want you to get them into a tangible, because in your head, you see the connections. But when we have to put it to definite words, it's sometimes really difficult to make the abstract concrete. But the more we do it, and the more we work together to kind of connect the dots, we build those neural pathways in your head that will make it easier to do the next time and the time after that. Did anybody answer this question with something different? Because there are a lot of ways that we can use this section to kind of address this in these last couple chapters. How about we guide through and talk about a couple of important things from these last couple chapters? Let's go to the very beginning of chapter 8. This would probably be 147. So let's talk with where we start there on 147, and let's talk about Gatsby's house. So kind of like we did here, let's go back to foundation. Why did Gatsby buy this house? Mm-hmm. So this all comes back to Daisy. I want to buy a house that's directly across from hers. Notice that he fills it with stuff to impress her. And we notice that it is all materialistic. It's all for show. We can talk about the library that we see in chapter 3, where they mention how all the books are real and seemingly untouched. We can talk about that tour that happens when in chapter 5, where Gatsby's showing off nothing but stuff. Hey, look at my shirts. Hey, look at this and that. Hey, let's look at this. It's all for her, but notice how that changes here at the beginning of chapter 8. What happens to Gatsby's house at the bottom of the page? We say that it now seems enormous. They trip over all these dark walls. They hit on the keys of a ghostly piano. There was a ton of dust everywhere, and the rooms were musty as though they hadn't been aired for many days. And when they do find a humidor, which is a box to keep tobacco moist, the cigarettes that are in there are stale or dry. The opposite of what they should be. Remember, it's not like they've been gone for weeks. But now all of a sudden, Gatsby's house seems old. It seems dead. Gatsby's house kind of represents his dream for Daisy. Here in chapter 8, it dies. And then, of course, what happens after Gatsby dies? Where do they put his body? In the house. It literally becomes his tomb. Not forever, but momentarily. Go with it symbolically. And then we can connect it, of course, to what we see at the very end. Before Nick has his reflection that we talked through, did you notice he has to get rid of a word that's like put into the walkway? You can probably guess what word it means, because Gatsby's house is now the refuse. It's trash, but it's also been digested. It's what remains. You can guess the word. 4 letters. Starts with an S. Crap.